Well, as I was just discussing with Congressman Chip Roy, and I hate the fact that we have to take breaks. I just keep talking with these guys. But we had to take a break. But we were talking about the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution that held a hearing earlier today to investigate the increasing number of attacks on pregnancy resource centers throughout the country, as well as the abuse of the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, or FACE Act. Now, this act was adopted back in the early 90s. Bill Clinton pushed this through back when, some of you might recall, Operation Rescue, where they were blockading the clinics to bring attention to abortion, successfully, I might add. Well, the federal government passed the FACE Act, but Orrin Hatch, who was a senator at the time, he's now deceased, he included provisions in here that applied the same provisions to churches and other religious organizations, that if you're blocking or interrupting church services, you could be charged under the FACE Act. Well, guess what? They've not done that. In fact, what we've seen in the last, year and a half, we've seen over 24 pro-lifers charged under the FACE Act. Even though there's been more attacks on churches and care pregnancy centers, we've not seen that used. Well, joining me now to talk about this is Arielle Del Turco. She is the director of the Center for Religious Liberty here at the Family Research Council, who has extensively monitored acts of hostility against churches in the United States, and she testified this morning before the subcommittee. Arielle, welcome back to the program.
Good to be with you.
So we just had Congressman Chip Roy on, played a couple clips. It looked like it got a little heated. Give us kind of your read on today's hearing.
Yeah, so House Republicans started this hearing really to investigate this question of why is the FACE Act being used to target pro-lifers when we're seeing all of these acts of vandalism, destruction, threats against pro-life pregnancy centers and churches? So it was a look into, is this law being enforced equitably?
And what did the testimonies present? What do you think the takeaway was?
I think the takeaway is that there's a serious problem with the way that the Biden administration is enforcing the FACE Act. We've seen federal agents go after pro-life activists like Mark Houck, arresting him in front of his 7 children for a very minor incident that took place in front of an abortion clinic.
Which, by the way, he testified this morning that local law enforcement refused to prosecute because there was nothing there. But yet you had the Department of Justice, as he testified, multiple agents showed up at his house. He described it as a SWAT team with long guns to arrest him, even though his attorneys had communicated that he would voluntarily surrender himself if, in fact, he was going to be charged with a crime.
Right, and that's so telling. It's very telling that local law enforcement did not consider this to be an incident worth looking into further, yet you have federal agents showing up, treating him abominably in front of his family, and that just signals how partisan these federal agencies are becoming.
Now, one of the members of Congress, one of the Democratic members from Georgia, seemed to was a little perturbed, the fact that you were testifying over the attacks on churches. He seemed to be a bit confused that the FACE Act actually covers churches.
Yeah, so the FACE Act actually protects First Amendment, the right to religious freedom for people entering a house of worship, and it also protects the house of worship itself, the buildings, against things like vandalism, threats, arson, all the things that we document in our report that are skyrocketing in the United States against churches and other houses of worship as well. So this is in the FACE Act, and this needs to be a part of equitable enforcement of the FACE Act, but he seemed to not know that.
Yeah, I would think that you would want to, and it's not a long, it's a one-page law. It's not very long at all. But if you're going to have a hearing on it, I would think that you would read it and know what it says before you start asking questions of the witnesses that are there. Talk a little bit about your report. I know you've been on the program before talking about that, but I think it's good for people to understand this increase that we see, this trend that we see of attacks on houses of worship. And there is a connection, if I'm not mistaken, in your data that shows that a lot of this really began to accelerate after the Dobbs decision.
You're absolutely right. So FRC has been tracking this for months now, and we found that between January 2018 and April 2023, 565 acts of hostility against churches. So that includes vandalism, arson, bomb threats, other acts of destruction on church property, but also interruption of worship services and things like that. So we've seen that increase over the last 6 years now. And even the first quarter of this year, between January and March, we saw the acts triple what it was in the same time frame the previous year. So this is all increasing, and it's deeply concerning. So
how many individuals that interrupted or attacked or vandalized a house of worship were charged under the FACE Act?
To my knowledge, none of the incidents that are covered in our report have been charged under the FACE Act. And as you noted earlier, these acts of hostility have really ramped up since the Dobbs decision and the Dobbs leak last May from the Supreme Court. So we identified last year 57 acts of hostility against churches that were directly related to the Dobbs Act. So it's pro-abortion protesters breaking into churches, spray painting threats onto the side of church buildings, interrupting mass services, all because they're angry at a decision that the Supreme Court made.
And a lot of them are connected to Jane's revenge.
Yes, many of them are. And many of them say open threats against these churches.
So, I mean, that would make it, because many of these are happening across state lines, it's clearly becomes a federal issue, but yet we've yet to see the federal government go after Jane's revenge and these others using the tools like the FACE Act that they have. Arielle, thanks so much for joining us, and great job today testifying before the committee.
Thank you.